Is Kamala Harris planning a coup?
Mr. Reagan.
Before I start, guys, if you would like to have a little bit of a laugh, I have a new video on my Mr. Pagan channel. It's pretty funny. I'm pretty proud of it. So after this video, please go to Mr. Pagan and support me there by watching that funny video. I'm trying to build that channel because this channel is getting crushed. So we're going to have to build that channel up so I have another outlet to express some of the ideas that I have about politics. All right, now let's get into it. So the other day, Joe Biden was caught on camera talking to the Indian Prime Minister, the Indian President? I'm not sure. Anyway, the leader of India. And he said, you know, the Indian press is much better behaved than the American press. And in fact, the American press has a tendency to ask questions that aren't on point.
The Indian press is much better behaved than the American press. And I think, with your permission, we should not answer questions because they won't ask any questions on point.
Well, what the hell does that mean? The media can only ask questions that are on point? And this got me thinking, why doesn't the Biden administration trust the U.S. media any longer? They used to be attached at the hip. They used to be buddy-buddy. I mean, the U.S. media used to be the best cheerleaders for Joe Biden. They hated Donald Trump, and now they're turning against him. At least that's how Biden perceives it. That seems a little weird to me, and it was very telling. And there's a lot of different explanations for this. I've gone through a number of different theories, and I'm going to explain them all to you. But the most provocative, I think, the most fascinating possibility is that there is a faction within the government that desperately wants Kamala Harris to be president. And this may seem completely insane to you because Kamala Harris was definitely not a candidate that anybody wanted to be president. She didn't really get any votes. She was just picked as VP because, you know, she was an intersectional woman, right? She was essentially a diversity hire. But I do think that there is a strong motivation for some people to get Kamala Harris into the White House. I will explain all of this in one moment. First, of course, I have to sell you something. I am back on keto, and let me tell you, if you're on keto, you really should be taking some MCT oil. And this is some of the best stuff that you can get. Keto Elevate from BioTrust. Actually, this is a new bag because my old bag I ran out of just this morning. Now, I've been making some ramen-like soups out of bone broth and these zero-carb noodles called konjac noodles, which are amazing, by the way. But then I dash a scoop of Keto Elevate in it, and I also put in a scoop of ageless multi-collagen as well. And this is a fantastic way to get in some MCTs. Now, what are MCTs? MCTs are medium-chain triglycerides, and they work a little bit differently than other fats. They go straight to your liver, and they produce ketones. Now, ketones can be used by the body to produce energy, much like carbohydrates, but instead of using carbohydrates on keto, we use ketones. And if your body learns to burn fat to produce ketones for energy, well, then you can start burning stored fat from your body. So MCTs are a sort of jump starter for that process. Now, many Americans struggle to lose weight, as we all know, but you know, after 20, our body's metabolism, it slows down by as much as 4% each decade. By the time you're 50, there's a 10% drop or more. And this is why I highly recommend going on a ketogenic diet, at least for a few months, and getting some Keto Elevate from BioTrust. I've lost about 15 pounds in the past month, and I feel healthier and better than ever. A little keto, a little intermittent fasting, a little exercise, and a little Keto Elevate will help you get fit. And by a little exercise, I literally mean walking. Walking is the best fat burner on keto. So if you've been looking for a way to support your weight management goals, you will love Keto Elevate. Get 51% off by going to ketowithreagan.com or by clicking on the link in the description below. Now, you guys remember that Joe Biden used to come out and talk to the media, and he would say, "I've been told that I can't answer any of your questions. I just have to leave. But I will answer a couple of questions," right? He would say, "I'm breaking the rules, guys. I'm a maverick. I'm going to take your questions, even though I was told by my handlers I'm not allowed to take them." He doesn't do that anymore. He's really stopped doing that. And in fact, this little clip here shows that he has decided to go along with it. No longer will he take questions from reporters. And we saw that, of course, the other week when he was with Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson took a couple of questions, and then Joe Biden's handlers just ushered everyone out of the room.
Would it be okay if we just have a couple of questions, just a couple of
Good
questions?
luck.
That's the.
British reporters get questions.
So what's going on here? Why is Joe Biden being so hostile with the American press? Well, there's a couple of ideas that I have. Now, Joe Biden has never taken a lot of questions from the media since the inception of his presidency, right? And most of us have speculated, well, that's because Joe Biden isn't very good off the cuff. He's old, he's senile, and he's probably going to look like a fool, right? He looked doddering and ineffectual back when he was campaigning, and this idea that, now that he's president, he's not going to get any better, right? But I think it's gotten worse now. And what's changed? Well, he's gotten a little older, maybe a little more senile, of course. But what he said there was very telling. The media is not on point. And the truth is, with regard to being nice to Joe Biden, the media really hasn't been on point since the Afghanistan debacle. They seem to suddenly feel free to ask questions to Joe Biden that are difficult. And this has really never been true. Throughout the campaign for president, Joe Biden really never had to answer a tough question. He was, and when he was first president, I think one of the early questions was about what he thought of Donald Trump's soul, if I remember correctly. That was one of the questions he got.
When you hear these remarks, suckers, losers, recoiling from amputees, what does it tell you about President Trump's soul and the life he leads?
So the media has always treated Joe Biden with kid gloves until recently. And now, I've thought about the reason why the media feels free to be a little bit more tough on Joe Biden. And the obvious answer is that, well, there's no Donald Trump anymore, and now the media maybe feel like they have to hold the administration accountable from time to time. And when you have so many disasters, like, they're dealing with the border crisis, they're dealing with COVID again, and these mandates where, they're saying that there aren't enough beds to handle all of the patients that are coming into the hospitals, but then they have this mandate which is going to cause thousands of nurses to be fired. Biden had his big welfare problem where he was providing so much welfare to people throughout the country that there were employment shortages. And of course, you had the Afghanistan debacle. So, there are all these issues that Joe Biden, there's no real good answer for him. There's no way that he can discuss this with the press and come off looking awesome. He's always going to look a little bit bad, and I think he knows that. So that's the obvious answer, right? The obvious answer is that there's just tons and tons of bad stuff going on, and you really can't ignore everything as the media. I mean, some people in the media do, but otherwise, it's going to be a pretty boring news day every single day if you just ignore every problem in the country. But Joe Biden is like, well, I don't want to have to answer those questions. But I think that there's more going on here. We all know that the media is handled to some degree by the DNC, by Democrats, maybe by the FBI, by different people within the government. Even the Biden administration themselves handle the media, right? It used to be that Joe Biden had this list and he would call on certain reporters and the reporters would ask the questions that, the administration already knew were going to be asked.
Are you calling on people, or how am I don't have a list, so you go ahead and call.
But as Joe Biden says, the media is no longer on point. So the reporters are willing to ask questions that aren't approved by the Biden administration. And here's a theory that I've had because this became such an issue during the whole Afghanistan debacle, and the media started to be actually critical, pretty severely critical of Joe Biden during the Afghan debacle. So I started to think about this, and if you think about the deep state and you think about the different factions within the deep state, you recognize that different players within the deep state have different motivations, different intentions, and sometimes their interests conflict. And I had predicted this from before Joe Biden was ever elected. I said, well, if Joe Biden gets into office, there's going to be a lot of infighting in D.C. The deep state's going to have to fight between itself over basically who controls Joe Biden. And my thinking is that the factions that have control over the media maybe no longer align with the factions that control Joe Biden, especially after Afghanistan, because the military-industrial complex had a vested interest in staying in Afghanistan. So Joe Biden removing the troops from Afghanistan, that went against the interest of some of the deep state players. And so a lot of these folks might say, okay, we have to punish Joe Biden for this, or we have to remove Joe Biden because of this and put in somebody who will act in our best interest. And I think that that is probably true. I also think that there are simply reporters that genuinely care about the direction that the country is going. I think there are some reporters who, they do dream of this utopian era in America that's like Star Trek, where everybody gets along and progressive values are universally appreciated. Of course, they're delusional. Progressive leftist values will inevitably lead to a dystopia rather than a utopia, but they think it'll lead to a utopia. So then when they see Joe Biden taking the country into a nosedive, they're like, whoa, 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 this is supposed to bring about a utopia. Trump was supposed to bring about the dystopia. You're bringing about the dystopia. None of this aligns with how I viewed the world going forward. So some people in the media, dare I say it, actually maybe a little bit think for themselves and think, okay, we've got to hold Biden's feet to the fire here. We've actually got to press him on these issues and make sure that we're acting in America's best interest in a progressive way. I think some reporters genuinely feel that way. Now, what they don't realize, of course, is that not everybody that is influencing Joe Biden right now cares about improving the quality of life for Americans. A lot of these folks, they actually want to sabotage America to some degree. I believe. That's what I believe. And so when they see America being destroyed, they're saying, well, okay, we got to ask some questions here. We got to see what's going on. And of course, Joe Biden doesn't want to answer those questions. So you have a multitude of reasons why perhaps the media feels emboldened to at least question Joe Biden and the administration. But here's something that I was talking to a buddy of mine, my friend Kurt, and he made a suggestion that I thought was really profound. He said that I think there are some people that actually want Kamala Harris to be president and they want to get rid of Joe Biden. And this is not something I had ever thought of, because Kamala Harris, in my mind, was always just the diversity hire. And Joe Biden was the puppet. And it's much better to have a puppet than to have a diversity hire in the actual office of the presidency. But then I realized how powerful the concept of a historic presidency can be to some people, right? And Kamala Harris being the first female president, especially the first female president of color, right? That's going to be a very strong motivation for some people to get behind Kamala Harris, because there is a possibility right now of the first woman of color being president, not because she was voted into office, but because they sort of snuck her in through the back door. If they can get rid of Joe Biden before his term is up, before his 4 years are up, then they can get this historic presidency. And there are just a lot of people that care a lot about their legacy, about having done something historic, about getting their names into the history books. And you notice how little Kamala Harris actually speaks in public, right? She does these little tiny press conferences here and there. She'll maybe take a question here and there. She was on The View the other day, very, very, very friendly media. So she'll pop her head up every once in a while, but for the most part, she's keeping under the radar. There's really nothing. I mean, you can have a hurricane. Kamala Harris says nothing. You can have the border crisis. Kamala Harris says nothing. You can have the Afghan crisis. Kamala Harris says nothing. You can have the COVID problem with the vaccine mandates. Kamala Harris says nothing. I mean, she's just hiding. And I think that this is by design. I think there's this idea now that, well, let's just focus on Joe Biden's faults. We can maybe question his ability to lead, and at some point we can remove him from office and we can bring Kamala in. And I think that there is some kind of a group. I don't know who these people are. I don't know who's driving this campaign, but I think that there's a certain subsection of the deep state that says we want Kamala Harris in. And so I think they're driving this push to make Joe Biden look bad through the media. You know, you do hear about leaks coming out of the White House. There was something about how Biden's staff won't even watch Joe Biden on television. Anytime Joe Biden appears on television, they mute the TV because they can't stand listening to him because he's such a, you know, he's so terrible.
Ever wonder what President Biden's staff does while he's speaking with reporters? Well, it seems some actually mute him or turn off the TV entirely because they are so afraid that he will make a gaffe or veer off message. One staffer telling Politico, "I know people who habitually don't watch it live for that reason."
You know, that leaked to the press and the press reported on that. And that's a really weird thing to me because the press have just been, you know, talking about how amazing Joe Biden is this whole time. Now suddenly they're leaking these kind of nasty things out of the White House. Well, these players at the White House or in D.C. who are leaking this information to the press, they're doing so for a reason. And I do think that we have to think through what that reasoning might be. And I do suspect that this could be a major reason why this stuff's going on. It's because people want a historic president in Kamala Harris. And obviously this is a terrible idea. I mean, you just don't hire somebody for a job they're not qualified for and they're not going to be good at simply because they are of Indian descent. They're a woman. Their father was from Jamaica. They probably have some percentage of, you know, African heritage. So, you know, they're diverse and interesting and a female and you know, yay us because we got somebody that's the right demographics into this job. That's terrible. You wouldn't do that with an engineer. You wouldn't say, oh, we got to build this bridge. Who are we going to hire? Well, there's these 10 white guys, and they're all awesome at it. There's this Indian woman. She's never designed anything in her life. She's clearly incompetent. But let's bring her in because she's an Indian woman. She builds the bridge. Of course, it collapses and everybody dies. You know, you just don't do that in really most other professions. Acting, okay, yes, you do that for acting, but but most other professions you wouldn't bring in an incompetent person just because they are a certain demographic. But we are doing that with politics. But these, of course, are not the qualifications that we want in a person running the country. And so, you know, I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think that Kamala Harris will be running the country before the end of Biden's term? I think most people think that. And up until this point, I haven't really agreed with them, but I'm starting to turn around. I'm starting to see, you know, because the left really cares about that. They really care about that so much more than we can imagine. I think on the right, you know, we genuinely care about qualifications. And so when the idea of just bringing somebody in because of their demographic characteristics, it's just so alien to us that I don't think we all really think about how important that really is to the left. And the more cynical among you will probably go, yeah, I've known this since Biden got elected. I knew they were going to do this. I'm certainly an optimist. I like to look at the bright side of things. I like to hope that the best things are going to happen. And they very rarely do. I am definitely becoming one of the cynics. And I think we all are. I think we're all becoming a lot more cynical now. We're sort of joining the ranks of these deeply cynical people who are naturally deeply cynical. A lot of us were deeply disappointed by the 2020 election. A lot of us believe that it was not legitimate. And I think that drove us a lot all to cynicism. And then especially after January 6th and the FBI is arresting conservatives who were just casually walking through the Capitol building. You know, this is a violation of civil rights. And so we're starting to see that the Democrats are even maybe more corrupt than we ever thought. The cynics were right. The cynics were right. And so, yeah, do I think that there are secret groups of people who are trying in the shadows to get Kamala Harris installed as president and get Joe Biden out? I absolutely do. And that, I think, is actually a much more powerful group than we might think. And it might be a small group of people, but they are effective. And the reason that they're effective is because Joe Biden does appear to be incompetent. And most of the stuff that he's doing seems to be failing and making the country a worse place. And the more incompetent that Joe Biden is, I think the more likely it is that this secret coup to try to get Kamala Harris installed as president, I think that it will be effective. All right, well, I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. I've got a new video out on Mr. Pagan, so go ahead and watch that. I think it's like 5 minutes long, so if you want to check that out, please do. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. And remember, it's not that all liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
This is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, Therein lies the road to war. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery.